This is a Mercedes-AMG GTR, and it's the highest performance version of the Mercedes-AMG GT, which is one of my favorite new sports cars. Given how much I like the Mercedes-AMG GTS, I figured I had to try out this thing. And so, here we are. And indeed, here we are at Fletcher Jones MOTORCARS here in Newport Beach, California, which is the Mercedes-Benz dealership, the largest Mercedes-Benz dealership in the United States. They have everything, including this bright green AMG GTR. And so today, I'm going to review it. But first, I'm going to tell you what it is, because the AMG GT lineup is really confusing. Okay, so the AMG GT is a bland name for a very cool car. The base model is called simply the AMG GT, and it has 469 horsepower. Above that, you have the AMG GTS, which has 515 horsepower. Then above that, you have the AMG GTC, which has 550 horsepower. And then there's this, the king of it all, the AMG GTR with 577 horsepower. Think of it as cool, very cool, really cool, and then ultra cool. And this thing really is ultra cool. Like I mentioned, 577 horsepower, 516 pound-feet of torque from the twin-turbo V8. It'll do 198 miles an hour and 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Those are supercar numbers, but here's the thing. This isn't priced like a supercar. The starting price of this car is around $160,000. It'll do 0 to 60 only a half second slower than a Ferrari 488, but it's half the price. It's not common that Mercedes-Benz models are tremendously good values compared to their rivals, but this one is. Or at least it seems to be. Today, I'm going to try it and find out. So today I'm going to show you around the AMG GTR, and I'm going to show you all of the cool quirks and interesting features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the AMG GTR, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of my favorite used AMG models currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now I'm going to start on the inside of the AMG GTR, which has a surprising amount of interesting quirks and features, starting with the fact that when you climb inside, everything is off and all the screens are dark and the buttons are dark except one, which is of course the engine start-stop button. It is glowing red, sort of goading you into pushing it and starting your AMG GTR experience. Now the first button you might notice aside from the engine start-stop button is in the very middle of the dashboard. There is a yellow dial that says TC. This allows you to adjust exactly how much the traction control is on and sort of limiting your fun. In order to access the TC button, you first have to turn off the stability control, and then the TC dial can be adjusted, and you can dial the traction control to one of 9 different levels. 9 levels seems like a little bit too much for me, but then again, I'm not some crazy track driver who gets really into that stuff. Mostly, I just think it's interesting that the traction control off button sits right there in the middle. It's like the focal point of the interior, reminding you that although you're in a Mercedes-Benz, you certainly aren't in an S-Class. With that said, this car, like all cars, is subject to all the latest fuel economy rules and regulations, and everybody's trying to get their fuel economy numbers up. And so this car, when you turn on, defaults to auto start-stop on, meaning the engine will shut off at stoplights to save fuel. So even though you got the AMG GTR, the highest performance Mercedes-Benz that exists with the sport bucket seats and the 577 horsepower and the big wing, you still turn off at stoplights to save fuel, which I find to be kind of funny. Modern regulations meets crazy old school V8 sports car. Next up on the center console, aside from the auto start stop, another interesting item is this little dial that lets you switch between the AMG GTR's drive modes. You have I for individual, C for comfort, S for sport, S plus for sport plus, and then there's race. And as you switch between them, the infotainment system screen shows sort of its interpretation of each drive mode, culminating in race, which is a picture of this car on the grid at a racetrack. So you have 5 different options for the drive modes you can drive your AMG GTR in. Now, interestingly, the button to turn on the radio and turn up the volume is on the other side. So Mercedes-Benz has prioritized the drive mode button over the volume knob, which I find to be kind of a cool thing in a high-performance car like this. Next up, another interesting item is the gear lever, which is tremendously tiny. And I mean like really tiny, like my thumb covers up the entire thing. In fact, the infotainment system control in this car, the little wheel wheel you use to adjust the infotainment system is larger than the gear lever, which is frankly not something you'll see in most vehicles. No idea why it's so small, but it is. Now, next up on the ceiling, next to the rear view mirror, you have all the buttons to control the lights. For example, there's a button to control the individual map lights for the driver and passenger. There's a button to turn on the dome light. All that stuff is pretty normal. There's also a button up there to turn on the light in back. So if you want to illuminate your cargo, you press that button and then you can see whatever it is you're transporting. In my opinion, that would be a great button for a movie where someone driving an AMG GTR has stolen something of value from someone else and they're driving along and the person says, "Are you sure, Mr. Johnson? Are you sure you still have your briefcase? Are you sure it's not back here?" And next up, another interesting item in here is the heated seats. You look all around this beautiful center console, the center control stack, and you'll see there's no heated seat buttons, but this car does have heated seat. The button is located on the ceiling, which is very unusual. Both the passenger and driver heated seat buttons are up there, so if you want to turn on their heated seats, you reach up. Now there's also another interesting button located on the ceiling, and that's the one with the little front of a car and some arrows pointing up or down. That button adjusts something Mercedes calls the air panel, which is a flap underneath the front of the car that moves around above 80 miles an hour to reduce lift and improve handling at high speeds. The button is so you can adjust it manually if you want. Unfortunately, the car is so low, I can't actually show this thing working, but trust me, you can see the flap move when you climb underneath. Next up, moving on to the gauge cluster. There are a couple of interesting items in the gauge cluster, starting with a setting you can go to called Assistance Graphic. If you click on that, the first thing it shows is an image of a car with like a road in front of it, in case you want to see what a car looks like with a road in front of it. Now, if you scroll down in that menu, you get to something Mercedes-Benz calls Attention Assist, which kind of monitors whether you're drowsy or how much attention you're paying. And you can see there's even a little bar in there that sort of shows from low to high how much attention you're paying. I wonder how this works if I look at my phone. Does that bar swing on down to low? I really think it only works for drowsiness. But either way, it's interesting. Mercedes-Benz feels their car can detect drowsiness and how much attention you're paying and display it on a little bar in the gauge cluster. Now, one other interesting item in the gauge cluster is the daytime running lights, which can be switched on or off. That's not all that unusual, but the weird thing is when you go into daytime running lights, it says they can only be changed with the engine off. So you can't switch it on or off with the engine running. So you turn off the engine and then you can switch the daytime running lights on or off. I have no idea why the engine has to be off for that to occur, but it just does. And of course, when you turn it off, the car in the graphic has the lights turn off and it looks very cool. Turn the engine back on and once again, the daytime running lights are frozen in place, but at least you can look at that graphic of your AMG GTR. And speaking of screens, next up we move on to the infotainment screen in the center console, and specifically move on to the vehicle data screen, which I find very interesting, especially because it shows your steering angle in real time. As you turn the steering wheel, it shows precisely what angle you have it in, left or right, which is kind of interesting. More interesting is to the right, it shows exactly how much accelerator or brake pedal you're using. I like the fact that this works even when the car is stopped. So if I rev the engine, it shows the accelerator, but if I just press the brake, it shows precisely how much brake I'm using, even though I'm not going anywhere. Either way, you could have this screen displayed at every moment while you're driving in case you need your car to tell you precisely what percentage brake or gas or steering angle you're using at any given moment. Now, next up we move on to an interesting quirk of the navigation system, and that is destination entry. You go in there and you see all the usual stuff, enter a street address, a city, whatever, but if you scroll to the bottom, you can enter coordinates. If for some reason you're a ship captain and you need to go to 37 degrees north latitude, 28 west longitude, 6 minutes, 4 seconds, because that's where all the big fish are biting today, you can do that in your AMG GTR. You can program it and it will take you there in the navigation system. I'm not sure if anyone has ever actually used that. I suspect not, but you have the option. Now, one other interesting item, if you go into Bluetooth and phone contacts, you can see you have 3 different options for how your phone contacts are displayed. The first 2 options, well, they're the same, right? Last name, first name, last name, first name. What's the difference? A comma. One option puts a comma between the last name and the first name, and one option doesn't. So if you're the kind of person who's that particular that you either want a comma or maybe you don't want a comma, then Mercedes-Benz is the right product for you. One other interesting interior item, this car has a start-stop button, obviously, as I already showed you, but if the start-stop button stops working or you're just tired of using it, you can pop open the center console and you will see there's an additional hidden keyhole in there. You can stick the key in, twist it, and then the car car will start right up without you having to use the start-stop button. When you close the center console, you can see the AMG logo is sort of emblazoned in the Alcantara, which looks cool. Now, next up, we move on to the trunk, and to open it, you press a little button on the key fob, or you can push a little button in the interior. You pop it open, and you realize it's actually surprisingly roomy back here. This car only has 2 seats, which is a drawback, but the upside is that there's a lot of room, which is surprising in an AMG GTR type vehicle. Now, one interesting item I found in the trunk is this thing. It's just a plastic piece randomly shaped. I have no idea what it goes to, although if you turn it over, there is a clear description. It says Motorrama Bedeckung. So now I know where to put that. Now, next up, I want to turn our attention to the window sticker. And like I said, the base price of this car is under $160,000, $157,000. This one is fully optioned up, and the sticker price is $195,000 and some change. Now, a couple of interesting items in the window sticker. One is that by government regulation, all automakers must disclose what percentage of the vehicle is built in the United States. And in this vehicle, it's 1%. What do you think it is? You think it's like the mirror glass is made in America? And so they have to put that on there, and they have to calculate, well, that mirror glass, that's about 0.87% of the whole car, so we'll call it 1%. And so 1% of the AMG GTR is American. Now, the other interesting thing is, of course, the color. This color is called, I'm quoting here, Green Hell Magno, AMG Green Hell Magno. It is $9,900. That's an enormous amount of money to pay for a color, but it is awesome. I mean, awesome. I'm standing in a room full of gray and black and silver and white Mercedes-Benz, just like virtually all new Mercedes-Benz, and just look at how much this thing stands out. It is truthfully one of the coolest colors I've ever seen in any car I've reviewed. Also worth noting, because this color is called Green Hell Magno, that means it says hell on the Mercedes-Benz window sticker. You think that's the first time Mercedes-Benz ever put hell on a window sticker? Almost certainly. Next up, I want to talk about the front of the car, specifically the engine, but I'm going to start with the hood. Now, you may be wondering why there's so much white space in the camera angle, and that's because the hood in your car only opens like this, your boring, average, everyday vehicle. The hood in the AMG GTR just keeps going and going and going until it's like this, 90 degrees. They call this the service position because when it's open like this, you have access to service basically everything under the hood. There's no hood getting in your way. Now, when it's open, you can see the glorious engine. Like I said, this is a twin-turbo V8 4-liter, 577 horsepower, and like all AMG engines, it has the signature of the person who handcrafted it. It is a sight to behold. I also like the fact that there's some of this Magno green Hulk color kind of sticking up at random places in the engine bay. It's kind of cool to see it under there. And one other item worth mentioning on the outside of the car, like a lot of AMG models, this one says V8 bi-turbo on the side to sort of emphasize its performance. The thing I think is really cool is right under that, there's this little black fin, and it looks like a serrated knife blade. It looks so aggressive and cool. I don't know if all the regular AMG GT models have that or just the GTR, but it is a really interesting and cool look. And finally, we must turn our attention to the back and specifically the exhaust note. Now, you probably know AMG is pretty good with exhaust notes, but this one is extra special. Take a listen to this car just in comfort mode. Okay, so that's comfort mode. Sounds pretty good. Now listen to it in race mode. That is just about the most aggressive exhaust note you're going to hear, and it goes perfectly with the green paint, the giant wing, the black wheels. It fits this car exactly. And so those are the quirks and features of the AMG GTR. Now it's time to do something I've wanted to do ever since I heard about this car. I'm gonna go drive it. All right, driving the AMG GTR. I really wanted to drive this car since they released it. I really liked the GTS. I thought the GTS was one of the better balanced sports cars I've driven. It was a luxury car when you wanted it to be, but when you wanted to go fast, it was crazy. Really, really insanely fast, a lot of fun, like a 911 Turbo, but for considerably less money. Sitting here at the stoplight, it feels pretty good. It's not too rumbly or shaky or anything like that. It doesn't beat you up like a Porsche GT3. The seats are a little bit more comfortable than that. Wow, God. Oh man.
that sound is really something else. There's, you know, in the world of today's world of turbocharging and everybody's going to V6 turbos, blah, blah, blah. Obviously this car is turbocharged, but it's still a big V8 and it still sounds like one. This has the old school muscle car, supercar rumble to it that I think we aren't going to get more and more. Anybody who's complaining about a 488 that doesn't sound the same as a 458, well, maybe you should get into one of these. God, you pull the paddle and it shifts down instantly. The shift's absolutely instantaneously, just as good as Ferrari 48. Any of the dual clutch stuff, Huracan feels really, really strong. But it's surprisingly smooth. You don't get a lot of shift shock. Everybody has kind of managed to engineer that out. And sitting here though, this thing is so cool. You look back and you see the wing, and you look up in front and you see the green, and you just think that you're in the coolest car, and that's because you are. Wow. God, the steering is just incredible. It's tremendously tight. Man, this is the thing. I can't believe though, the steering just made a U-turn. The steering is really, really tight, very connected, but it's still, man, it is so sharp. The steering is just so good. You do get that feeling that you get in all the cars with long fronts, that there's kind of a lot out there. It doesn't rotate quite as quickly as you do in a mid-engine car. Which is to be expected, but the steering itself still feels so precise and so connected. The thing I like about the acceleration is, even if you put it in Sport or Sport Plus, the shifting is really not all that uncomfortable, so it doesn't feel jerky or anything at low speeds. Mercedes has managed to give us a transmission that is surprisingly smooth, and yet it can be as fast as you want when you're actually stepping on it, and that's a pretty cool thing. It's rare that you actually get that combination, except in really high-dollar cars. What do you think race is like? Wow, the exhaust in race is just wild. Man, at 4,000 RPM, I feel like I'm qualifying for Le Mans. God, it's incredibly fast, and when you're in this race mode, the car changes direction so quickly. It's just a level shy, just barely, of 488 and of Huracan. Huracan is probably the most precise steering car I've ever driven. This thing is not that far off, which is pretty incredible considering it's a front engine car. The steering is just so good and so sharp. The weight is actually really good. God, it's so precise. You can really point and shoot in exactly what direction you want to go and what lane you want to be in. It's incredible how precise it is. It's a precision that you don't expect from Mercedes-Benz. And so that's the AMG GTR. Now, I reviewed the AMG GTS a while ago, but it was quite a while ago before I started really showing you the quirks and features. But I was really impressed with that car, and this one is even more impressive. And now it's time to give it a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the AMG GTR is very cool looking, but not quite on head-turning exotic level, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Handling is tremendously sharp, but not quite up there with the mid-engine supercars, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Fun factor is huge, especially in race mode. It's fun to drive, fun to sit in, and fun to listen to, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Cool factor is good, but not supercar good. Car geeks know the difference between the AMG GTR and the regular AMG GT models, but normal people will just see a Mercedes coupe, albeit a bright green one. It gets a 7 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 40 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. It has a lot of good tech, but obviously it's no S-Class, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is fine, but only fine. It's not as comfortable as a standard AMG GT, but not as harsh as most mid-engine exotics, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is good. The interior is nice, though a few things are looking outdated compared to the latest Mercedes models. Also, obviously, long-term reliability is always a concern with these, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is good. 2 seats is a drawback, but the cargo area is large and gets a 3 out of 10. Finally, there's value. It's hard to call a car a good value when it costs $190,000 or even $160,000, but this one is a good value compared to its competitors. It gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 28 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 68 out of 100, and here's a comparison against rivals because I've reviewed basically all of them now. It's not as good as Huracan, 488, or 720S, but those are also way more expensive. It beats out the AMG GTS, just barely, along with the new NSX and the latest Corvette ZR1. The closest competitor is the Audi R8 V10 Plus. The Audi is more expensive, but not by much, and the Audi is also quicker. For me, it would be a hard choice between these two.
Mercedes-Benz feels the car can detect drowsiness and alert you if you're Rah, rah, rah. I don't know where I'm going. That's where all the big fish are biting today. I don't know why you'd use that, but you can plug in coordinates in your AMG GTR.